A scream tore through the party. Gun! The crystal chandelier shook, distinguished guests panicking, running for exits. A little girl in a white dress stood frozen in the center of the hall, eyes wide with terror. Gunshots cracked sharp, muzzle flash cutting through the darkness. A man in a worn shirt lunged forward, arms spread wide to shield her. The bullet tore into his shoulder, blood spraying. He whispered softly, "You're safe, kid." In that moment, the ballroom fell silent, and the fate of two families changed forever. The man's name was Daniel Hayes, 38 years old, a veteran who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to a world he barely recognized. After his discharge, he worked as temporary security for events, barely making ends meet while raising his 6-year-old daughter Sophie alone. He lived in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of Warsaw, walls stained and peeling, but covered completely with children's drawings that Sophie made every day. His wife Hannah had died of cancer 3 years ago, leaving Daniel exhausted and barely keeping his head above water. But he never stopped fighting for his daughter. The only photo of his family he kept carefully tucked in his wallet, the image faded from years of handling, creased from being pulled out and looked at during the hardest nights. That evening, Daniel had been hired as extra security for an extravagant gala at a 5-star hotel downtown. Black tie event, wealthy guests, the kind of world he'd never belonged to. He stood at the edge of the ballroom in his ill-fitting suit, watching people who spent more on their watches than he made in a year. Halfway through the party, gunshots suddenly rang out. Chaos erupted instantly. Guests screamed and stampeded toward the exits, trampling each other. In the strobing emergency lights and confusion, Daniel saw her, an 8-year-old girl in a white dress standing completely alone in the middle of the ballroom, separated from the crowd. She was frozen with fear, unable to move, tears streaming down her face. Daniel didn't think. His body moved on instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive in combat. He ran toward her, not away from the danger, but directly into it. "Get down!" he shouted, but she couldn't move. He reached her just as the gunman fired again. Daniel threw himself in front of her, his arms wrapping around her small body, turning his back to the shooter. The impact felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. The bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him halfway around. Blood sprayed across the white marble floor. But he held on to the little girl, his body shielding hers completely. As they fell together, Daniel landing hard on his side to protect her from the impact, he whispered through gritted teeth, "You're safe, kid. I've got you." The little girl sobbed against his chest, her white dress now stained with his blood. Security guards swarmed the gunman seconds later. Taking him down, the threat was over. But Daniel's vision was starting to blur. Blood pooled beneath him, warm and sticky. The little girl looked up at his face, her eyes terrified. "Don't die, please don't die." "Not planning on it." Daniel managed to smile despite the pain. "What's your name?" Emily Grant." A woman's scream cut through the chaos. "Emily!" A striking woman in an elegant evening gown ran toward them, heels abandoned somewhere behind her. Victoria Grant, CEO of Grant Industries, one of the most powerful women in Europe. She fell to her knees beside them, pulling Emily from Daniel's arms and checking her frantically for injuries. "I'm okay, Mommy. He saved me. He saved me." Victoria's hands were shaking as she held her daughter. Then her eyes met Daniel's, really looked at him for the first time. A security guard in a cheap suit, bleeding out on her ballroom floor, who'd thrown himself between a bullet and a stranger's child without hesitation. As paramedics rushed in, Daniel's wallet had fallen from his pocket. Emily picked it up with trembling hands, and the old family photo slipped out, now stained with Daniel's blood. Emily stared at it, a younger Daniel, a beautiful woman, and a tiny baby with bright eyes. "He has a family too," Emily whispered, clutching the photo like a precious thing. Daniel's blood-stained family photo held in Emily's trembling hands. Daniel woke up in a hospital room 3 days later, his shoulder wrapped in thick bandages, pain medication making everything fuzzy. Sophie was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her small hand clutching his. She'd refused to leave, the nurses told him. Refused to go home. Refused to eat until she knew he was okay. "Hey, Ladybug," he whispered. his voice rough. Sophie's eyes flew open. "Daddy!" She burst into tears, climbing carefully onto the bed to hug him, mindful of his injury. "I'm okay. I'm right here. They said you might die. They said you lost so much blood. It takes more than that to keep me from you." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm not going anywhere." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Victoria Grant entered, Emily hiding slightly behind her mother, clutching a small teddy bear. Emily approached the bed slowly, then suddenly thrust the teddy bear into Daniel's good hand. "For you, so you remember I'm safe." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll treasure it." Victoria stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, her usual commanding presence somehow diminished. "Mr. Hayes, you saved my daughter's life. I owe you a debt I can never repay." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I just did what any parent would do, what I'd want someone to do for Sophie if she was in danger." Emily turned to her mother, her voice small but clear. "Mommy, he said you're safe, kid, when he fell. Even though he was hurt, he made sure I knew I was safe." The simple statement hung in the air. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away, her composed mask cracking. She'd spent Emily's entire life building an empire, working 18-hour days, missing birthdays and bedtimes, always telling herself it was for Emily's future, for her security. But this stranger, this man who had nothing, had given everything without hesitation. The next day, against her lawyer's advice, Victoria brought Emily to Daniel's apartment to properly thank him. The small space was a shock after her penthouse. Cramped, the furniture worn, wallpaper peeling, but it was spotlessly clean and covered with Sophie's artwork. Emily's eyes went wide. "It's like a gallery." Sophie, shy at first, took Emily's hand. "Want to draw with me?" Within minutes, the two girls were on the floor with crayons and paper, giggling like they'd known each other forever. Emily picked up a blue crayon and started drawing. "This is the house. This is you and your daddy." Sophie added red. "This is you and your mommy." Together, they drew 4 stick figures standing in front of a small house, holding hands. Victoria watched, stunned. Emily never drew pictures of them together. Her daughter's art was always solitary figures, lonely scenes. Daniel boiled a simple pot of noodles, adding slices of slightly stale bread on the side. "It's not fancy, but you're welcome to stay for dinner." Emily took a bite and her face lit up. "This is better than the restaurant." Victoria laughed despite herself. "Emily, we eat at Michelin star establishments." "But this tastes like home," Emily said simply. After dinner, Sophie pulled Victoria down to sit on the floor and showed her the pencil marks on the wall measuring her height over the years. Next to them was a name written in faded pencil. "Hannah," Sophie's mother. Victoria reached out and touched the name gently. "Your wife?" Daniel nodded. "Cancer, 3 years ago. Sophie was 3, barely remembers her." "I'm sorry." "Me too." Daniel looked at his daughter, laughing with Emily. "But we keep going. It's what Hannah would want." Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Here was a man who'd lost everything, who had nothing, but who still found joy, still protected strangers, still smiled. She'd built an empire but lived in emotional poverty. He lived in actual poverty, but was somehow richer than she'd ever been. As evening fell, Emily didn't want to leave. She held up the drawing she and Sophie had made. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Victoria looked at Daniel, an unspoken question in her eyes. "Doors always open," he said quietly. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that cramped apartment, the drawings on the walls, the pencil marks measuring a little girl's growth, the faded name of a dead wife, and the man who'd taken a bullet for a stranger's child. Without a second thought, she pulled out her phone and looked at the drawing Emily had left with on her. 4 people, a small house. For the first time in years, Victoria wondered if she'd been chasing the wrong things. The crayon drawing of 4 people in front of a house, made by Emily and Sophie together. News of the shooting spread like wildfire. Within days, media outlets were running the story. Security guard takes bullet for CEO's daughter. Daniel's face was plastered across newspapers and news sites. Hero father risks life for stranger's child. At first, the attention seemed positive, but then everything changed. Richard Coleman, Victoria's biggest business rival and longtime enemy, saw an opportunity. He'd been trying to bring down Grant Industries for years, and this was his chance. His team of lawyers and PR specialists went to work, spinning a narrative. Security guards staged shooting to gain favor with CEO. Tabloids picked it up immediately. Single father's desperate con. Did he orchestrate attack? Coleman's lawyer showed up at Daniel's apartment with a thick envelope of cash. Sign a confession that you knew about the shooting in advance. Admit you positioned yourself to be the hero. Do this, and this money is yours. Daniel stared at the envelope. More money than he'd seen in years. Money that could pay his rent for a year, get Sophie new clothes, fix their broken heater. His hands shook as he picked it up. Then he threw it on the floor. My honor isn't for sale. Get out. The lawyer smirked. You'll regret this. We'll destroy you in the press. You'll never work security again. Then I'll find other work, but I won't lie about saving a child's life. When Victoria heard about the attempted bribe, she was in a board meeting. She stood up in the middle of a presentation and walked out. Her assistant ran after her. Ms. Grant, where are you going? To fix this. She called an immediate press conference, something she never did. Victoria Grant didn't engage with tabloid scandals. She was above the fray. But not this time. Standing in front of dozens of cameras, with Emily beside her, Victoria spoke clearly. There have been false accusations against Daniel Hayes. Let me be absolutely clear. This man risked his life to save my daughter. No one has the right to slander a father protecting a child. Emily stepped forward to the microphones, her small voice amplified. I saw everything. Mr. Hayes protected me. He didn't hurt anybody. He saved me. The room erupted with questions, cameras flashing. But Victoria took Emily's hand and walked out, leaving the media in chaos. Coleman wasn't finished. He sent investigators to dig into Daniel's past, looking for anything to use against him. They showed up at Sophie's school, questioning teachers. They followed Daniel to job interviews, warning employers not to hire him. Within a week, Daniel had lost his security license. No one would hire him, afraid of the controversy. He sat in his apartment, staring at bills he couldn't pay, wondering how he'd feed Sophie next month. Victoria showed up unannounced, saw the stack of rejection letters on his table. They're blacklisting you, she said, her voice tight with anger. Seems like it. Daniel tried to smile. I'll figure something out. I always do. Why did you refuse the money Coleman offered? It would have solved your problems. Because Sophie is watching me. Every day she watches what I do, how I act, what I stand for. He looked at his daughter's drawings on the wall. How can I teach her integrity if I sell mine? Victoria felt tears threatening, something that hadn't happened in years. You have something I never had. Real courage. The kind that doesn't calculate. Emily ran into the room, having been playing with Sophie. She held up another drawing, this one showing Daniel standing between her and danger. Mr. Hayes, can you be my hero forever? Not just that one time? The simple question broke something open in the room. Victoria knelt down beside her daughter. Emily, what if Mr. Hayes and Sophie became part of our family? Would you like that? Emily's eyes went wide. Really? Like for real? Sophie gasped. Daddy, can we? Daniel looked at Victoria, seeing past the CEO to the woman beneath. Are you sure about this? My world and your world, they're completely different. Maybe that's why they fit together, Victoria said softly. You have what money can't buy, and I have resources to protect what matters. Together, we could give these girls something neither of us had, a real family. Coleman tried one more attack. He released a statement claiming Daniel was manipulating Victoria for money. Victoria's response was to have her lawyers file a massive defamation lawsuit. But more than that, she made a public announcement. Daniel Hayes will be joining Grant Industries as Director of Security, not because I owe him, but because he embodies the values our company should stand for. The media went crazy. CEO hires shooting hero. From security guard to executive. But in Daniel's small apartment, away from the cameras, the real change was happening. Victoria brought over dinner. Emily and Sophie were inseparable, and for the first time, they felt like a family. On the table sat Coleman. Coleman's envelope of cash, still unopened, gathering dust. A reminder of what Daniel had refused. You could have taken the easy way, Victoria said, looking at it. Easy ways lead to hard lives, Daniel replied. I want Sophie to have better than that. Victoria picked up the envelope and tore it in half, then again until it was confetti. So do I. The torn envelope of bribe money scattered across the table like confetti. Daniel's recovery was slow. The bullet had done more damage than initially thought, requiring a second surgery and months of physical therapy. But he wasn't alone anymore. Victoria rearranged her schedule to drive him to appointments. Emily and Sophie came along, turning boring waiting rooms into art sessions. His new position at Grant Industries started remotely while he recovered. Daniel reviewed security protocols, trained staff via video calls, completely revolutionized their approach. You think differently, Victoria told him during one of their strategy meetings in his apartment. You see threats others miss because you have actually faced them. Afghanistan teaches you to trust your instincts, Daniel said, flexing his healing shoulder. Boardrooms aren't that different from combat zones. Different weapons, same survival instinct. Victoria laughed, a real laugh that surprised her assistant listening on the call. The Ice Queen of Grant Industries was melting. Emily started spending every weekend at Daniel's apartment with Sophie. The two girls were inseparable now, finishing each other's sentences, creating their own secret language. They planted seeds in a small pot on the balcony, taking turns watering it. When this grows flowers, Emily announced, it means we're a real family. We're already a real family, Sophie corrected. The flowers will just make it official. Victoria started joining the weekend visits. At first, she'd sit awkwardly while the girls played, checking her phone constantly. But slowly she relaxed, started sitting on the floor, helped with the drawings, even attempted to cook, though her first try at pancakes ended with the smoke alarm going off. Daniel and the girls laughed so hard they cried. Victoria joined in, covered in flour, realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this. I spent years building an empire, she told Daniel one evening after the girls were asleep. I thought success meant never needing anyone, never showing weakness. Success is different for everyone, Daniel said. For me, it's seeing Sophie smile. Everything else is just noise. I envy that clarity. Victoria looked around the small apartment. You have so little, but you're so rich. And you have everything, but we're so poor. Daniel took her hand gently. Maybe we're meant to teach each other. The community around them started to notice the changes. Neighbors who'd felt sorry for the struggling single dad now saw him with the powerful CEO, and gossip spread. But it was Daniel's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, who said it best. Money doesn't make a man, character does, and that boy has more character than most men I've known. Victoria started bringing Emily to the apartment for dinner regularly. Daniel cooked simple meals, spaghetti, chicken, things he'd perfected over years of single parenting. Emily declared every dish better than the private chef at home. Because Daddy Daniel makes it with love, she said, using the name she'd started calling him. Sophie beamed every time Emily said it. See, I told you she loves you, Daddy. One weekend, Victoria surprised them. I've been thinking, this apartment is wonderful, but it's small for 4 people. Daniel tensed, worried she was about to suggest they move into her penthouse. He couldn't live in that sterile, perfect space. So I bought the apartment next door, Victoria continued. We can knock down the wall, combine them. Make it ours, not mine, not yours, ours. Daniel stared at her. You bought an apartment in this building? I bought 3, actually. One for us, one for Mrs. Kowalski because she shouldn't be paying rent at her age, and one for the community center we're going to build. She looked almost embarrassed. I know it's not the penthouse, but I think the girls would be happier here, and I want to be where you are. Daniel pulled her into a hug, mindful of his still healing shoulder. You're sure about this? Giving up your perfect life? It wasn't perfect. It was empty. Victoria held him tighter. This is perfect. This mess, this case, this life. It's real. The renovation started the next week. Emily and Sophie designed their shared room, a space that was half princess castle, half art studio. They painted a mural together on one wall. 4 stick figures in front of a house, the same image from their first drawing, but bigger, more detailed, more real. The plant on the balcony started to bud, tiny green shoots promising flowers soon. Daniel's shoulder healed completely. On his first day physically at Grant Industries headquarters, Victoria introduced him to the board. "This is Daniel Hayes, our new director of security. The man who taught me that real strength isn't about power, it's about sacrifice." That evening, all 4 of them sat on the balcony of their combined apartment, watching the sunset over Warsaw. Emily pointed at the plant. "Look, the first flower's opening." A tiny white bloom, delicate and perfect. Sophie squeezed Daniel's hand. "It's official now, right?" "It was always official," Daniel said. "But yes, now it's official. The small potted plant with its first white bloom on the balcony. 6 months after the shooting. Daniel woke early, as he always did, his body still running on military time despite years of civilian life. He walked quietly through the expanded apartment, careful not to wake anyone. The renovations had transformed the space. What had been cramped and small was now open and warm. 2 apartments knocked into one, creating a real home for their blended family. He stopped in the kitchen, making coffee, and looked at the wall they'd decided to keep. The one with all the pencil marks measuring Sophie's height over the years. They'd added new marks now. Emily's heights, measured carefully and marked with different colored pencils. The 2 sets of marks intertwining, growing together. And Hannah's name was still there, faded but present. Victoria had insisted they keep it. She's part of this family's story. She always will be. Daniel heard small footsteps and turned to see Emily padding into the kitchen in her pajamas, clutching the teddy bear she'd given him in the hospital. He'd given it back to her, and she slept with it every night now. "Morning, sweetheart. Bad dream?" Emily shook her head and climbed into his lap. "No, good dream. I dreamed about the day you saved me." Daniel tensed slightly. The therapist had said Emily might have PTSD from the shooting, but so far she'd been remarkably resilient. "That was scary for you, wasn't it?" he said gently. "At first," Emily admitted, "but then you were there, and you said, 'You're safe, kid,' and I knew it was true. You made the scary go away." She looked up at him with absolute trust. "Daddy Daniel, will you always keep me safe?" Daniel's breath caught. She'd been calling him Daddy Daniel for months, but it still hit him every time. "I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. But Emily, you know I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen." "I know. But I also know you'll always try. That's what makes you my daddy." She hugged him tight. "My forever daddy." Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Are we having a family hug without me?" She launched herself at them, and Daniel caught her with his good arm, pulling both girls close. Victoria found them like that 20 minutes later, the 3 of them on the couch, Emily and Sophie coloring while Daniel braided their hair with practiced fingers. "I used to think success meant corner offices and board meetings," Victoria said, setting down her briefcase. "And now I know it looks like this." She'd changed so much in 6 months. Still CEO, still brilliant, but softer somehow. She smiled more, laughed more, left work at reasonable hours to come home. Because this was home now. Not the penthouse she'd barely lived in. This warm, slightly chaotic apartment filled with children's laughter and hand-drawn pictures covering every surface. The girls finished their latest masterpiece, a drawing of their family at the park. They'd gotten so much better, the figures actually looking like people now instead of stick figures. At the bottom, in Emily's careful handwriting, "Safe together forever." Daniel felt his throat tighten, remembering the moment in the ballroom when he'd whispered those words. "You're safe, kid." It had been instinct then, a soldier protecting the innocent. He hadn't known that little girl in the white dress would become his daughter, that her mother would become his partner, that they would build something beautiful from a moment of violence. Victoria sat beside him, taking his hand. "I have something to tell you, all of you." The girls looked up, suddenly serious. "The trial for the shooter concluded yesterday. He's going to prison for a very long time." Victoria's voice was steady but emotional. "And during the trial, we learned something. He was hired by Richard Coleman to create chaos at the gala, to embarrass me and disrupt the company. Daniel's fist clenched. He hired someone to shoot at a children's event? He's being charged now, too. Conspiracy, reckless endangerment, attempted murder. Victoria looked at Emily. But baby, the reason I'm telling you this is because you need to know. What happened that night, it wasn't random. And it wasn't your fault. Emily had been carrying guilt, her therapist had told them. Guilt that Daniel got hurt because of her. Daddy Daniel got hurt because he's a hero, Emily said firmly, and because he loves me. That's exactly right, Daniel confirmed, pulling her close. Victoria continued, but there's more. The judge asked if we wanted to give a victim impact statement, and I said yes, but only if Emily was ready. Emily sat up straighter. What would I say? You'd tell them how it affected you, how it made you feel, but Emily, you don't have to. We can speak for you. Emily thought for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the drawer where they kept art supplies and pulled out a piece of paper. She drew quickly with the confidence of a child who knew exactly what she wanted to say. When she finished, she held it up. The image showed the moment Daniel shielded her, but instead of scary, she'd drawn it with bright colors. With hearts. With the word safe in big letters. This is what I want to show them, Emily said. They tried to make something scary happen, but they gave me a daddy instead. They lost and we won. Sophie hugged her sister. That's perfect. Daniel couldn't speak, emotions overwhelming him. This child, who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, had become his daughter in every way that mattered. Victoria wrapped her arms around all of them. We did win. We won everything that matters. Later that day, they took a walk in the park, all 4 of them together. Other families stared sometimes, recognizing the CEO and the hero from the news. But they didn't care. Let people stare. Let them wonder. Let them gossip about the unlikely family, the powerful woman and the security guard, the 2 little girls who weren't sisters by blood, but by choice. As they walked, Emily grabbed Daniel's hand. Daddy Daniel, thank you for saving me that day. Daniel knelt down to her level, his shoulder fully healed now, strong again. Emily, I need you to know something important. I thought I saved you that day, but really you saved me. How? Because before that night, I was just surviving, going through the motions, taking care of Sophie but not really living. He gestured to Victoria and Sophie walking ahead. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to believe in family again. Emily threw her arms around his neck. Then we saved each other. Yeah, kid, we saved each other. That night, as Daniel tucked both girls into their shared room, Emily asked one more question. Daddy Daniel, do you still have that picture? The one from your wallet? He knew which picture she meant, the one of him and Hannah and baby Sophie, now forever stained with his blood from that night. I do. Want to see it? Emily nodded. Daniel pulled out his wallet and carefully removed the photo, its edges worn, the blood stains faded but visible. This is your first family, Emily said. The one you had with Sophie's mommy. That's right. And now you have us too, your second family. Emily smiled. You're lucky. You get 2 families. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. You're right. I'm the luckiest man alive. He tucked the photo back in his wallet, next to a new one. A recent picture of all 4 of them, laughing on the balcony, the blooming plant visible behind them. 2 families, 2 chances at love. One man who'd been brave enough to protect a stranger's child and had been given everything in return. Victoria peered in the doorway, watching them. She'd heard the whole conversation. Family isn't where you're born, she said softly, repeating words she'd learned from Daniel. It's where you choose to stay. And I choose this, every single day. Daniel stood and pulled her close. So do I. Outside their window, Warsaw glittered in the night. Somewhere in that city, people were still chasing money and power and success. But in this small apartment, they'd found something worth more than all of it combined. They'd found each other, and they'd found home. And every night before sleep, Emily would whisper the words that had saved her life. I'm safe. Because she was, they all were, finally truly safe. The blood-stained family photo next to the new photo of all 4 of them, both kept in Daniel's wallet. If you believe healing stories like this deserve to be told, Leave a comment below and subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories. We tell the stories that should never be forgotten. Thank you for listening.